All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today because I'm giving birth, actually, in about 20 minutes to a new project that I've never spoken about publicly before. It's been 4 years that we've been working on, so I'm really excited to be here. Not just because of that, because I'm the first time in Cape Town, actually, in South Africa, and it's been so far an amazing past 2 days. I run a design studio in New York, and we practice cross-disciplinary design. Cross-disciplinary design that goes from product to architecture, art direction and interior, and we really have no idea what we're doing every single day. We're basically reinventing ourselves every single day. And actually, that's the beauty. When I started my practice 8 years ago, I kind of wished that, okay, when will be the first time that we're going to do this kind of project and that kind of project and that type of project, so we'll be able to say, this is one of our hotel, this is a chair that we've done. Today, I actually wish that every project will be new, unique, and different, because my main interest is in innovation. I'm going to be speaking today a lot about different scales. I'm going to run through a few projects that are in really different scale. But first, my passion is in transformation, where physics and poetry meet primarily. I'm going to be speaking a lot about collapsibility, about the need to work from physics, from our actual physical need, and also about our emotional need. So the first project I'm going to be speaking about, and actually a couple more seconds about the studio. We're a very small design studio in the center of Manhattan, and we really learn how to, every time, bring the knowledge that we're lacking, to bring consultants and different collaborators to work with us, as we know that we're really play with creativity, we play with a lot of different materials and form that we've never experiment with or worked with. So it's been a really interesting place. Now, moving to New York in 2002 was hard. Was really hard, and I really felt like, how can I express this feeling that I'm having going home every day, trying to do what my passion is. I immediately pretended I'm we, and the studio was pretty much myself for quite some time. And this was my very first expression to really speak about my own feeling in New York, taking an iconic vase and breaking it and taking it into the experience of who we are, the experience that we go through. This is in production with Rosenthal for the past 5 years, and it's been very successful for us and for Rosenthal as an icon for really, who we are and the phases we go through as a metaphor in a product. So this is, for me, always I refer to the icon for metaphorical transformation. And the second project is actually, for me, the idea of physical transformation. Taking a folding chair out of the closet and actually letting it stand on the wall as an art piece, and highlighting the beauty that when a guest comes to my environment, I don't pull a chair out of the closet that I'm not proud of, but I'm actually presenting it on the wall as an art piece, and I'm letting him sit on my art. So here we start realizing that what we're playing with is the boundary between art and design, two-dimensional versus three-dimensional, practicality and aesthetic. And we realized that we actually just created a canvas with hinges. So we started collaboration, and we've been actually doing all kinds of different collaboration. The first one was 100 Years from Mondadori, a publishing house in Italy. And this one is a clear version that we debut on top of the Rockefeller Center in New York and actually traced the view of downtown Manhattan and added some vision of additional building as an installation for the debut of this project. So it's been a really a fun collaborative effort that highlights this idea. Duality is something that is really interesting for me because I find duality in everything. And I find innovation kind of in between duality of two things that are clashing into one another. This is a project we've done for Capellini. One of the smartest advice I heard from somebody was when you are going to actually emerge the physical transformation together with the metaphorical transformation, that's where really the most interesting things will happen. And I think that here we've done that, taking felt that have no structural integrity to hold a person in his typical state, but actually by folding it on a very minimal frame, creating a structure with those folds. And also, you know, the idea of a peacock, which for me was the inspiration, an animal that opens up his feather for two completely opposing reasons, an attraction and also defense, which is kind of, again, playing with that duality in a way that, that is highlighted in this collaboration with Capellini. Architecture has been something that I had no knowledge or how do you say, school knowledge. And it's something that I found myself one day wondering what would be if I'll start designing in a larger scale and taking some of my ideas into a larger scale. I've been talking about cross-disciplinary as a studio, and architecture kind of came a little later on. So I found myself one day sketching an A-frame house on my sketchbook, and I was wondering, why does every kid draw an A-frame house? What's the significance of this icon in terms of structure? And I realized that there are a lot of places that have 4 seasons. A very cold winter, which needs a pitched roof for structural load, and then in the summer, can I change that icon because I don't need a pitched roof? So we thought about creating an hydraulic system that works just like a garbage truck. 2 pistons, 2 hydraulic pistons. And we liked the idea of changing the icon. Very quickly we realized we can change the program of the house. And later we realized that the sun is very different during the summer and during the winter. So we can take advantage also on the summer sun that is higher, that actually there's, because of the gap, there's a wind tunnel that goes between the structure. But in the winter, because the sun is lower, it can penetrate in and actually warm the house. So utilizing this movement as an ecological system. And that very first project was very exciting for me because it was really the first time I took what I call transformation into an architectural scale. So we started building a portfolio of architectural projects, and we presented it to some clients, to some potential developers. Very quickly, we met with a very interesting client in Abu Dhabi that commissioned us at first to a very short conceptual study of 6 weeks. I've showed them my vases, I showed them my chairs and other work and some conceptual architecture, and they said, we have 135,000 square meters of land off the coast of Abu Dhabi. Come up with an idea. So I found myself for the very first time looking at what's called a master plan. And I just naively thought, okay, the hotel should be here, the residential should be here, and the brief was very simple, was let's try to fit as many luxury housing in, on this island and have a hotel that would service those residentials. And I realized, who would want to buy a house on the land and see 16 neighbors from the left and 14 neighbors from the right? So I thought that luxury is really all about privacy in that type of setting. And I want to find ways to actually camouflage everything and have the feeling that I'm the only one on this island. So thinking about the Persian Gulf and realizing that we always say, lift the carpet, shove everything underneath, and hide it. As a really a conceptual direction for this entire project, in fact. So I said, why don't we create this large, massive architectural carpet that covers everything, that covers all the residential, and becomes this roof that is also your garden. So we start building this program, and I think it was really interesting because we, you know, a lot of what we work on, whether we get a brief or we design without a brief, we really try to always put question mark next to everything and say, just what if? And play as kids and play very naively. So this project started like this. We've ran that type of program into basically everything. The hotel, which has those adjacent bungalows that are sitting on a center column that becomes a spiral staircase, which have kind of open to the horizon. And then every villa that is situated on the land have its own unique shape. Everybody have its own private beach. And the roof really becomes the garden. So you have those moments where the carpet kind of opens up and reveals different things to have light come in. Also playing in the underside of the carpet with the ornamental motifs of that region. And the view is always towards the horizon. Then playing with water villas. There was a part in the brief about villas on the water and villas on the land, and I thought, can we, instead of holding those villas traditionally from underneath, can we actually hang them from the roof? So they will be suspended with bridge cables in such a way that they have no calm grid inside, and playing with the strength of a square inside of a square, creating those 4 triangles. So that was the approach for those villas. Then really realizing that the climate in Abu Dhabi is extremely hot, and the water sometimes is not as pleasant to bathe in, creating those pools that appears as ice cubes and basically floating in the water in a different temperature. Then to another really interesting challenge that I never thought about in design, which is a high tide and a low tide, which in this region is about 1.20 meters or so. So I proposed this building that plays with the highest point of the tide and the lowest point of the tide being the 2 points of the roof of this underwater spa. When you're inside, the building is oriented in the direction of the waves, so when you get a massage, the building gets a massage as well, and change the amount of light that comes in and change throughout the day. So, and the last part that we presented on this project was what we call the water cube. It's the only building that actually sits on top of that carpet. It is constantly covered with running water. And only when you approach it from those 4 wings on each side, it actually pitches open and reveals the structure and let you enter with a very simple thing that just lift kind of the carpet of this water and let the water glide to the side. So we sent this presentation after 6.5 weeks. We got a phone call back a week later saying, the Crown Sheikh of Abu Dhabi saw your presentation and he wants to build it. That was exactly... Thank you. I laughed hysterically for about a minute on this call. I just could not stop laughing. And they were quite serious, 7 guys on the phone, and I just laugh. I send you, if the client was Walt Disney, I would approach it the same way. I didn't really think about, could we build it? Is it the right thing to do? I didn't even think about all those titles that some of the engineers that came a week later to my studio, dredging engineers, marina engineers, and I just thought, okay, I'm going to basically go into the meeting, say that I'm not an architect by train, and this is my vision, can we build it? This was the very first time that I realized that you can actually do whatever you want in Abu Dhabi. And it's one of the only places that you can work like that. While we were working on this project, actually we worked for a project for Target. So I will be going from one meeting where we're discussing how to shave cents from each product to, several $1 million kind of flying off the conference table from side to side. And very little I know is that there is something so logical in taking logical approach. And this project, which is actually being built right now, which I'll get to in a second, is actually very green because of those green roofs and using the gray water that you're using to actually water your gardens. 6.5 months we've been given the commission started, and they've basically wanted us to design all 65 residents. I start laughing again. And they said, we know you've never done a project of that scale before, and we need to pad you with the knowledge that you're lacking, which is a sentence that I've been kind of starting to repeat after they said that, because this is exactly what, for me, creativity is about putting the knowledge aside, like Michael was saying, and actually thinking like a kid and really kind of seeing if something is possible and then bringing the knowledge in to see if you can actually validate that. So we opened the sales office on the island 6.5 months later, and with this material, 72 hours later, the project was sold out. All 65 residents. I always say that actually they were more successful than Avatar on his first weekend. And this is just a few images about the architecture. So there's two different types of houses. One that is directly on the beach and one is a little bit recessed. And the one that is on the beach is kind of like two-structure. I passed it too quickly. And the second one is a bit recessed in, which you actually enter from the second floor, because it's the one that the shape of the island is kind of. But what was really interesting is actually the dramatic view that you get when you enter, as the layers in front of you from the horizon line to the beach to the pool in front of you. And then the water villas that are pretty much like we envisioned them, a rotated cube inside of a cube for the strength. And for me, I learned another really interesting thing with this project is that if I can communicate a concept with one word, this word can actually stay and remain. And the idea of a strong concept that actually can maintain, every time somebody was mentioning we need to have this equipment on the island, where should we hide it? Where is the carpet? How the carpet is going to cover it? So the carpet has been the word that has been used all along, and really kind of made this project from just a concept in our studio to becoming a reality. So the project is scheduled to be completed by the end of the year, and that's the first villa completed, and a couple of other visuals of what this project looks like in the past few months. So how far can an idea go? And that's actually the start of my second part, which is what we call a QuaDror. I'm going to take a second to breathe here, because I've been really, waiting for this day of debuting this project. It's been 4 years of working on this without really sharing it with except some engineers and some people that brings us knowledge to share it with you. So I'm going to actually talk about how we got to this whole thing and what it became and what we're trying to actually do with this. It all started 4 years ago when we were working on a project for Swarovski. And with that project, all I tried to do is to intersect two squares into one another in a way that the squares are exactly the same. And I realized that, okay, you can either have an internal square or an external square or something that have some kind of chopped corner. But I start cutting pieces, and yeah, actually, okay, I'll take those now. I'll take them now. Thank you. Actually, I need to start with that. Yeah, thank you. What we tried to do is to intersect two squares into one another. At this point, purely for the aesthetic purpose, and realize that if we're taking 4 L shapes that are exactly the same, and I'll be repeating this actually here. If we're taking this exactly identical 4 L-shaped pieces and putting them in such a way that they're creating this yin-yang, maybe I'm going to do it actually with those big pieces. Let me break them. Yeah. So, a little larger model. So, it started really like this. Taking 4 identical shapes, placing them in such a way that they're creating this, what we call a square yin-yang, next to each other. And then 2 more that are sitting, facing, let's call this facing down, and those are facing up, in such a way that they're forming that kind of geometry. And by connecting one piece to the opposing one, it's like a cooking show. This one is already glued. There's a lot of glasses on the floor. But by basically connecting one to the opposing one, basically letting them, oh, he's shy. He's a little shy. They can actually open up. Thank you. So at first, we didn't really, we just really loved this, and we didn't know what to do with it. And we start playing, and we open and close it so many times. But what we realize is that it's identical from all 4 sides. Every time you have a V on one side, you have an A on the other side in 4 times. Later we realized the tremendous strength and capability of this geometry. So it's basically a hinge without any need for a pivot point, for a revolution point, and the fact that it's always parallel to one another, so you can actually stack them on top of one another. And create those kind of forms. That again, we thought, what can we do with this? So we start really just, again, playing, experimenting, and doing all kinds of different things, from frames to solid panels, and just making a lot of models. The studio that I have today have 4 different areas. One which is the digital playground, and then a workshop, and then a think tank, as we call it, and a 4th place, which is just a space that constantly changes depending on the challenge. But we realized that there are a lot of different product that needs structural strength. Product, and then of course a larger scale product that need structural strength. So we've divided what we've done now to 4 categories. The first one is really focusing on the solid panel, and it's basically what we call a new type of building block. So this is basically the same thing in a smaller scale, but you can see, take this down, you can basically see how easy it is to make a wall that can stack with no additional fasteners out of a pile that size into, in this case, 6 meter by 2.5. Then we realized that, okay, this can be all kinds of walls. Is there any type of additional advantages but speed? And we realized that one of the biggest advantages is actually the acoustic that this geometry creates. So now we're actually working on highway walls with this geometry. So sound barrier because of the acoustic, the ability to construct this so simply out of one identical L-shaped mold, or in this case just one angle cut out of a hot wire with styrofoam. But so the dividing category is really interesting. This piece, which was basically the first piece that was created, can hold, as the engineer told us, 86 pieces on top of it of the same kind without collapsing. Which is, of course, means that if we're not stacking 86 pieces on top of one another, there's just wasted energy, which means that those pieces can be a lot thinner. Already in this state, they are saving quite a lot of material. And I'll be talking a lot about energy efficiency in design in general, because at the end of the day, everything is about energy. But the strength of this shape, as we know it today, is that it's very much comparable to the same strength of a block, or almost the same strength of a full block of that size with just 20% material. So obviously a lot of saving on material. And really the reason, which I'll get to in a couple of slides from now, the reason is triangulation, 4 triangulations that are always opposing to one another. The second part is exactly the same, but in a form of a frame, which works exactly the same. So half of the geometry is there, and the other half is here. So those are identical, and they're basically opening like that. Now, the angle, of course, the amount of opening depends on the angle that those pieces are cut. And we start looking at larger scale. So this is the first I-beam, kind of 12-foot by 12-foot structure that is able to actually lift by hand, and the huge advantage is that it's self-standing. This panel, as well as those pieces, actually have a 43 degrees of tipping point, which is pretty much like a solid block of that dimension, which is extremely solid. So what are we doing with this? The ability to aggregate, the ability to connect pieces to one another, which is basically what got us into thinking in larger scale and about architecture right away. And we start looking at Jean Prouvé and Buckminster Fuller and their vision for deployable architecture or prefab. And we start looking at those possibilities, and we start realizing that one of the interesting things is that it's a frame. So the skin is separated, and it's just a bone. So this house can actually ship flat, and the skin of the house really depends on the climate that you put it in. So it really you can customize it to the type of client by the need of the skin. So it comes as a flat pack, and comes like that. So we're working on several different type of homes like that. So the diagrid, Norman Foster have proven already that a diagrid is more beneficial than a typical ground-up construction, which this geometry as well is so far showing that we're probably saving about 30% on the amount of steel that we need to use. The geometry, not going to get into the technical part so much, but is really the ability to convert what Leonardo da Vinci sketched as an octagon and really creating it in a way that it can open and close. So we actually hired Arup to help us with this engineering, because not myself or anybody in the team, and this is the kind of information that they provide us, the ability to aggregate, the ability to count, deliver, and the ability to actually see how those things can connect. So we're working on all kinds of different deployable architectural structure in this scale. And this is actually a concept that we've worked for Cape Town, actually. And it's made out of identical pieces. So the next part that we realize is that if you use typical members, just I-beams and those unique corner pieces, what if we can really approach all kinds of different conditions like disaster relief and all kinds of need with very little material and actually utilizing what's available. So this is obviously done with just I-beams and those corner pieces. But then we looked at structural strength in different scale. And as we work in different scale, we constantly do that, and we start looking at, can this house support in exactly the same way as the larger houses? So we start researching and realizing that over 1 billion people today live in slum-like condition, and the biggest problem that we wanted to address is the structural strength of their homes as an improvement. There's not a lot of organizations that are actually working on improving the homes, the personal dwelling, because how do you start addressing such a large problem? So you're working on schools first and hospitals and so forth. But what if we can take this geometry and actually just improve the structural strength? So we're looking at what we call today a universal kit of part that is just the corner pieces, that is able to attach to all kinds of members, bamboo, branches, dimensional lumber, and others, just to create the geometry. And basically, the skin is whatever you have available locally. So we're engineering this right now, and actually going to build the first one next week in New York, as all places. But really, the idea is that it's not foreign to the culture, and it's not different. It's really something that you also have an ownership because you've built it yourself, and it's so easy to just pick from the ground flat and lift it, and it opens up and creates this geometry. So just another one slide about structural strength, comparing a typical rectangle and an A-frame, which is the two kind of basic forms, and just putting them in a very simple software to understand the vertical load and the horizontal load, and actually how much stronger two of those units side by sides are. And of course, for the kit, the ability to stack 1,750 kits in one container that can actually help 1,750 homes in just one single 40-foot container is really the focus. So there's endless possibilities, and the way that we're setting this up right now is that we understand that we will not be addressing all of the challenges that this type of geometry can provide. So we're basically saying this is a call for collaboration. This is a call for, we want to help utilizing this in all kinds of different cases, and we are, obviously open to hear the different structural challenge that companies and philanthropic organizations have and work with them. Thank you so much.
Mr. Dror Benshetrit.
Well, I haven't showed you this guy. Okay, I'm just going to open it. I'll collect my
Dror, we've had so many questions for you on SMS, and we will post them on the website, so if you just watch that out over the next week. But quickly, there is one question, and it is your flat wall chairs, which are absolutely beautiful, by the way, might also be appreciated by poorer households with limited space and obviously limited funds as well. Is there a cheap mass production version available? And I suppose we could apply that same question to your QuaDrors, your Dror Quads. Oh, I'm getting it all.
Yeah, we're actually, it's funny that you're asking. This is the next thing that we're probably going to be unveiling soon. It's a cheap version of the pick chair. We realized that we gave the design to a manufacturer that is not really for the dorms and the one-bedroom type of living. So it's been, the concept didn't really fit the price point, which is another thing to learn. So now we're actually remaking them out of wood. They're half the weight and much cheaper.
Great, thank you very much. Can I just ask a question with relation to that, the concept and the price point? Do you always start at blue skies without a price point in your mind?
I don't really work with a brief, and and I'll tell you why. Actually, I always find that the briefs that I get from my clients are just very often wrong, meaning they just not in any disrespectful way, but you know, a lot of time the clients are actually asking the wrong questions and wants to get different answers. And a lot of time we return with a set of questions rather than a set of answers, and make them realize that actually a lot of time their questions were not the right questions. So I think that that's an important way. And I always, you know, I hope that I'll be continuing to work like a kid. So I do not right away think about material specifically, unless it's a material challenge and material actually talks what it wants to be. But I think that the role of a designer is primarily to improve people's well-being. So I think that, you know, if the project can be mass-produced in the right way, then that's what it should be.
So it's a case of asking the question before you find the answer. I want to invite Mike Shallett, we all know him very well, Chief Creative Officer, CCO of Network BBD, to hand you your pin, your Anglo Platinum pin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to take this.
A very, very big hand to Mr. Dror Benshetrit. I think it was a fascinating conversation.